They laughed when the alien princess chose a human as her husband. But no one knew that this weak human would soon outsmart entire civilizations and rewrite the rules of the galaxy. The galaxy didn't fear humans. They underestimated them. And underestimating one human would soon cost empires their fleets, their thrones, and their pride. They laughed when the alien princess chose a human as her husband. Among warlords, psionic kings, and immortal species, he was nothing but a fragile creature from a weak world. No one believed this human would survive palace life, let alone a galactic war. The galaxy didn't fear humans. They underestimated them. And that mistake would cost entire empires their fleets, their thrones, and their pride, starting with the day they tried to take the alien princess from the man they thought was harmless. They laughed when the alien princess chose a human as her husband. Among warlords, psionic kings, and immortal species, he was nothing but a fragile creature from a weak world. No one believed this human would survive palace life, let alone a galactic war. The galaxy didn't fear humans. They underestimated them. And that mistake would cost entire empires their fleets, their thrones, and their pride, starting with the day they tried to take the alien princess from the man they thought was harmless. From the moment Daniel Mercer stepped onto Virel Prime, he knew every eye was judging him. The capital world of the Virelian Dominion was a masterpiece of impossible architecture. Floating citadels, living crystal bridges, towers that bent toward the stars as if reaching for them. Species from across the galaxy filled the ceremonial avenue, their forms towering, glowing, armored, or shimmering with psychic energy. And then there was him. A human. No natural weapons. No exoskeleton. No psionic aura. Just a man in a dark formal uniform, walking beside Princess Seraphine Valcora, future empress of one of the most feared civilizations in known space. To the crowd, it didn't look like a royal procession. It looked like a mistake. Seraphine felt it too. The tension. The disbelief. The barely concealed insult vibrating through the air. Her people bowed deeply as she passed, but their eyes lingered on Daniel with confusion, and something dangerously close to contempt. She leaned closer to him, her voice low. You don't have to keep walking so calmly. You are allowed to look intimidated. Daniel smiled faintly. If I start now, I'll never stop. She studied him again, as she had done many times since the Alliance Council proposed the marriage. He was average by human standards. By Virelian standards, he was painfully fragile. Her guards could shatter steel with a thought. Her generals had lived for centuries. Her rivals commanded suns to burn. And this human was now her husband. The ceremony itself was ancient, binding not just two individuals but two civilizations. When Seraphine placed her hand over Daniel's heart, she felt its rhythm, steady, unenhanced, stubbornly human. This is my weakness, she thought. The galaxy would think so too. The first weeks passed without incident, which only made Seraphine more uneasy. Peace, she had learned, was never silent. It simply whispered before it screamed. Daniel spent his days wandering the palace, observing. He asked questions that made scholars uncomfortable. He listened more than he spoke. He memorized guard rotations without being told. When Seraphine asked what he was doing, he always answered the same way. Learning where I am. The attack came during a diplomatic banquet. The hall was filled with nobles and envoys when the lights flickered. Not off, just slightly wrong. Daniel noticed it instantly. Humans were good at noticing when things didn't match expectation. He reached for Seraphine's wrist. Get down, he said. A heartbeat later, the ceiling ruptured. Assassins dropped from a cloaked strike craft, weapons humming with anti-psionic frequencies. The Virelian guards reacted fast, blinding fast, but not fast enough. Daniel moved before the first scream finished echoing. He shoved Seraphine behind the banquet dais and intercepted an assassin mid-air. He didn't overpower it. He redirected it. Momentum was a universal language, and humans had been translating it since they first threw stones. A pulse weapon fired. Daniel rolled, felt heat tear across his sleeve, and used the fallen alien's mass as cover. Another assassin lunged at Seraphine. Daniel didn't shout. He didn't hesitate. He crossed the distance and drove a ceremonial dagger, meant purely for symbolism, into a gap in the assassin's armor that only someone who had studied anatomy would notice. Silence fell in waves. When the guards finally secured the hall, they found the princess unharmed, and the human standing between her and the bodies. News spread faster than official reports ever could. Not exaggerated. Not embellished. Just one terrifying fact repeated over and over across encrypted channels. The human had reacted first. Seraphine confronted Daniel later that night. Her composure cracked for the first time since they met. "You were trained," she said. "You didn't tell me." He met her gaze evenly. "You didn't ask. For what purpose would your people train someone like you?" Daniel considered that. Because the universe isn't kind to things that can't fight back. From that night forward, Seraphine stopped thinking of Daniel as a weakness. And elsewhere in the galaxy, powers far older than her empire began to adjust their plans. Because a human who could do that without enhancements was not a political symbol. He was a warning. The warning, however, went unheeded. Beyond Varelian space, in regions where ancient empires slept behind layers of arrogance and obsolete assumptions, Daniel Mercer's name was filed away as an anomaly. A statistical outlier. A fluke. Humans, after all, were still humans. Short-lived, physically inferior, emotionally volatile. One dangerous individual did not change a species. That belief would soon cost them billions. Inside the palace, life changed in subtle ways. Guards no longer dismissed Daniel with polite nods. They watched him now. Some with curiosity, others with unease. Seraphine noticed how conversations shifted when he entered a room, how generals paused mid-sentence, recalculating. She found him one evening in the palace archive, standing before a holographic star map that showed the Varelian Dominion and the neighboring territories. "You're mapping potential threats," she said. "I'm mapping inevitabilities," Daniel replied. She crossed her arms. "You assume war." "I assume pressure," he said calmly. "And pressure always finds the weakest seam." Seraphine studied the map. "You believe that seam is you." "No," Daniel said. "It's you loving me." She turned sharply. "Explain." "They won't attack you directly," he continued. "Not at first. They'll try to humiliate you, undermine you, make your choice look foolish. A ruler who bonded herself to a lesser species." Her jaw tightened. "You are not lesser." Daniel smiled faintly. "They don't know that yet." The first diplomatic insult came disguised as courtesy. An invitation from the Karzuan Collective, an empire whose military doctrine relied on overwhelming force and psychic dominance. They requested a formal audience, without Daniel present. Seraphine rejected it immediately. The second insult came louder. Trade sanctions. Blocked hyperspace lanes. Subtle economic pressure meant to test her resolve. Daniel said nothing. The third was violence. A Varelian patrol vanished near the border of Karzuan space. No distress call. No wreckage. Just absence. The War Council assembled in emergency session. Voices rose. Generals demanded retaliation. Psionic strategists argued for restraint. Through it all, Daniel stood at the edge of the chamber, silent. Until Seraphine spoke. "My husband has not yet offered counsel," she said. "I would hear it." Several council members stiffened. One even bristled. But none openly objected. Daniel stepped forward. "They want you angry," he said. "And predictable." The Supreme Admiral sneered. "And what would you suggest, human? We allow them to butcher our patrols." "No," Daniel replied. "We let them think we are afraid." Confusion rippled through the chamber. "We pull back our fleets," Daniel continued. "Publicly. We broadcast it. Make it look like weakness." "That is madness," the Admiral snapped. Daniel met his gaze. "So is underestimating your enemy. Trust me. They already think they understand you." Seraphine held up a hand. Silence fell. "And you?" she asked Daniel. "What will you do while we appear weak?" Daniel's eyes hardened. "I'll remind them why humans don't bluff." The Karzuun took the bait. Their fleets pushed deeper into contested space, confident in their psychic superiority. They expected panic. They expected surrender. What they encountered instead was chaos. Supply depots detonated without warning. Communications fractured under false signals and recursive loops. Entire battle groups chased phantom fleets that never existed, lured into kill zones or stranded without fuel. The Varelians watched in disbelief as an enemy that had terrorized the sector for centuries began making mistakes. Seraphine realized the truth slowly, then all at once. Daniel wasn't commanding fleets. He was shaping behavior. Humans, she learned, did not always win by strength. They won by forcing their enemies to defeat themselves. The Kazoon finally retaliated with full force, launching a massive assault toward Virel Prime itself. Their psychic warforms tore through space like living storms. Daniel stood beside Seraphine on the command deck as the first enemy signatures appeared. "You should evacuate," she said quietly. He shook his head. "This ends here." She reached for his hand. "Daniel, if you die." He squeezed her fingers. "Then make sure it matters." When the Kazoon flagship breached the system, something unprecedented happened. Its system shut down. Not destroyed. Not disabled by weapons. Locked. A human code, primitive by galactic standards, had slipped past psychic firewalls that relied on minds, not logic. A flaw no one had bothered to fix because no one believed a non-psionic species could exploit it. Daniel had. The flagship drifted, helpless. Across the system, Kazoon vessels began powering down one by one, victims of a strategy no empire had prepared for, a war fought without honor, without symmetry, without the rules ancient species had agreed upon. The battle was over before most of the galaxy realized it had begun. In the aftermath, envoys arrived in silence, then fear. Treaties were rewritten, borders redrawn, and everywhere, the same question echoed. What kind of species produces someone like that? Seraphine stood before the assembled council weeks later, Daniel at her side. "The galaxy underestimated humanity," she said. "So did we." She turned to him, no longer seeing weakness, no longer seeing a symbol. She saw a survivor of a brutal universe. A man who had turned love into a weapon and restraint into terror. As the council bowed, not to her, but to them, a new truth settled among the stars. Humans did not need to rule the galaxy. They only needed to be loved by someone who did. And the universe would never make that mistake again. That belief lasted less than a standard year. Peace, Daniel learned, was fragile in a galaxy built on memory and pride. Empires did not forget humiliation. They archived it, studied it, and waited for the moment when revenge could be disguised as necessity. The moment came quietly. Far beyond Virelian borders, in a region of space stripped from most star maps, an ancient assembly convened. Species older than Seraphine's empire, older than recorded history, gathered not in panic, but in calculation. They reviewed battle data, psychological profiles, human behavioral anomalies. Their conclusion was unanimous. The human was the variable. Not humanity as a whole. Not yet. Just Daniel Mercer. Remove him, and the anomaly collapses. The assassination attempt did not come with fleets or threats. It came with precision. Daniel sensed it first on a morning that felt too normal. The palace was quiet. The air currents wrong. The guards relaxed in ways they never should have been. He stopped walking. Seraphine turned. "What is it?" "We are already late," Daniel said. "They're inside." The attack was surgical. No explosions. No alarms. Reality itself bent as phase-shifted assassins emerged from folds in space, entities bred for one purpose, erasing targets that could not be challenged directly. They did not underestimate him. They overcompensated. Daniel pushed Seraphine behind a structural column as time fractured. His movements were human, limited, imperfect, but his decisions were instantaneous. He used terrain, timing, sacrifice. He took a blade meant for her. The wound burned white-hot, tearing through muscle and nerve. He stayed upright. Seraphine screamed, not in fear, but fury. Her psionic field erupted, tearing two assassins apart in a storm of light. The last one reached Daniel. It hesitated. That hesitation cost it everything. When the silence returned, Daniel collapsed. The palace medical wing had never seen damage like his. Alien physicians worked frantically, baffled by human anatomy, by pain thresholds that made no sense, by a heart that refused to stop even as logic demanded it should. Seraphine never left his side. For the first time since her ascension, she prayed, not to ancestors, not to cosmic forces, but to the stubborn cruelty of humanity itself. Daniel woke 3 days later. The galaxy felt different. Not because of him, but because of what his near death had revealed. The assassination attempt had failed, but its message had not. Empires now understood that as long as Daniel lived, balance itself was unstable. Humans, through him, had changed the rules. Seraphine understood something else. "They will never stop," she said quietly, sitting beside his bed. Daniel's voice was weak, but steady. "Then neither will I." Recovery took months. During that time, humans became interesting. Varelian intelligence began noticing patterns. Human advisors requested access to systems others had ignored. Human engineers improved shield efficiencies not by adding power, but by simplifying designs. Human diplomats asked dangerous questions. Questions about intent, about fear, about what ancient species were afraid of losing. The galaxy watched as humanity shifted from ally to influence. Not conquerors. Catalysts. When Daniel finally returned to public life, it was at a summit meant to redefine interstellar law. Every major power attended. Every ancient species watched him walk beside Seraphine. Still human, still unaugmented, still alive. A representative from the ancient assembly spoke what many feared to say. "You are dangerous," it said flatly. "Your species disrupts equilibrium." Daniel didn't deny it. So did fire. So did agriculture. So did the first tool picked up by something that refused to die quietly. The chamber was silent. "We don't want your galaxy," Daniel continued. "We want a place in it. But understand this, humans don't survive by fitting in. We survive by adapting. If you push us into a corner, we don't disappear." Seraphine stepped forward, her presence radiating authority. "You underestimated my husband," she said. "And through him, you underestimated his species. That era is over." Treaties were signed that day, not out of fear of fleets, but fear of consequences. Because the galaxy had learned the most terrifying lesson of all. Humans did not need to dominate. They only needed a reason. And somewhere, deep in the archives of ancient civilizations, a new warning was added, written in a dozen languages, but meaning the same thing every time. Never mistake softness for weakness. Never mistake love for limitation. And never, ever assume that a human standing quietly beside a throne is harmless. The warning spread, but warnings rarely change nature. They only delay it. Beyond the rewritten treaties and ceremonial smiles, something darker began to grow. Not fear. Fear could be managed. What took root instead was obsession. Ancient species had ruled the galaxy for so long that the idea of a new variable offended them. A species that did not rely on psychic dominance, genetic perfection, or immortality, but still bent events around itself, was intolerable. So they changed tactics. If the human could not be killed, he could be isolated. If he could not be isolated, he could be turned. And if he could not be turned, then humanity itself would be tested. The first human colony fell without a declaration of war. It was a small settlement on the edge of map space, barely defended, chosen precisely because it mattered so little. A mining accident, the report said. Reactor failure. Tragic. Unavoidable. Daniel knew better the moment he saw the data. Sabotage disguised as entropy. An old trick. He stood alone in the observation chamber, staring at the holographic ruins. Seraphine watched him carefully. She had seen him angry before, but this was different. This was quiet. "They're probing," he said at last. "Not for strength. For response time." "You want to retaliate," she said. "No," Daniel replied. "I want to teach." The next attack never came. Instead, a convoy belonging to one of the ancient empires vanished from hyperspace. No debris. No survivors. Just absence, cleaner than violence, louder than any threat. The message wasn't public. It was precise. We noticed. Panic rippled through intelligence networks. Accusations flew. No one claimed responsibility, and that terrified them more than a declaration of war ever could. Humans had learned long ago that uncertainty was a weapon. Seraphine confronted Daniel in private. "You didn't tell me," she said. "I didn't need to," he answered. "You would have stopped me." She didn't deny it. "You're escalating." "No," he said quietly. "I'm equalizing." The galaxy had always treated humanity as a resource. Labor. Soldiers. A useful population that could be pointed at problems and expended. What Daniel was doing, what humans were doing now, was refusing that role. Human fleets began appearing in places they had no business being. Not large fleets. Small ones. Flexible. Fast. Crewed by people who didn't believe in glorious last stands, only in coming home alive. Ancient empires struggled to understand them. Human ships retreated when outmatched. Humans abandoned worlds when holding them made no sense. Humans lied in ways that confused predictive models and fought in ways that made no aesthetic or strategic sense, except that they worked. Seraphine watched it all with growing awe. This is what your species has always been, she realized aloud. Not warriors. Survivors. Daniel nodded. Survival just looks violent when the universe insists on testing it. The breaking point came when the ancient assembly made its final mistake. They announced a containment protocol. Humanity, they declared, would be restricted. Limited expansion. Monitored development. For the sake of galactic stability. It was presented as mercy. Daniel listened to the broadcast in silence. Then he turned to Seraphine. They still think this is about control, he said. They still think we want what they have. She stepped closer. What do humans want? Daniel smiled, not kindly. To be left alone, he said. And to make sure that never has to be negotiated again. What followed was not a war. Wars had fronts. Timelines. Victory conditions. This was something else. Humanity withdrew. Strategically. Colonies consolidated. Fleets vanished into deep space. For a brief, foolish moment, the galaxy believed it had worked. Then the infrastructure began to fail. Trade networks collapsed under subtle inefficiencies. AI governance systems began disagreeing with themselves. Ancient psychic nexuses, stable for thousands of years, fell into silence as no one could explain why they suddenly stopped resonating. Every failure traced back to one truth. Humanity had been everywhere. And no one had noticed. Daniel addressed the ancient assembly one final time. Not as a husband. Not as a symbol. As a human. You tried to manage us, he said evenly. You tried to contain us. That's understandable. We do the same thing to fires that get too close to our homes. The chamber stirred uneasily. But you forgot something, he continued. Fire doesn't ask permission to spread. It only needs oxygen. He looked directly at the representatives who had ordered the containment. And you gave us a galaxy full of it. The protocol was withdrawn within hours. Borders reopened. Restrictions vanished. Apologies, carefully worded, followed. Humanity did not celebrate. They built. Years passed. Then decades. Seraphine ruled wisely, her empire stronger not because it dominated, but because it adapted. At her side, Daniel aged in a way no Varelian ever had. Slowly. Inevitably. One night, much later, she found him watching the stars again. You changed everything, she said softly. He shook his head. No. I just reminded them who we are. And who is that? Daniel took her hand, his grip still firm despite the years. The species that survives, he said. No matter what the universe throws at us. When Daniel Mercer finally died, it was not in battle. It was peacefully. Human. Finite. The galaxy mourned him, not because he was a ruler, but because he was proof. Proof that weakness was a matter of perspective. Proof that love could reshape empires. Proof that humanity, once underestimated, would never be again. And somewhere, in the quiet between stars, the universe learned to be careful. Because humans were no longer harmless. They were inevitable. History would later argue about when the shift truly happened. Some claimed it was the first battle Daniel won without firing a shot. Others said it was the day an ancient empire apologized to a species it once called insignificant. But among humans, the answer was simpler. It happened the moment the galaxy realized that Daniel Mercer was not unique. After his death, many expected humanity to fade back into the background of galactic affairs. After all, legends are convenient excuses. Remove the legend, and the fear should dissolve with it. It didn't. Instead, something far more unsettling emerged. Humans didn't collapse without Daniel. They didn't fracture. They didn't panic. They adapted. Seraphine saw it firsthand. Human envoys no longer asked for permission the way they once had. They negotiated with calm confidence, never threatening, never pleading. Human fleets patrolled their own borders now, not aggressively, but with quiet certainty. The galaxy began to notice a pattern. Where humans settled, piracy declined. Where humans traded, economies stabilized. Where humans fought, wars ended faster than expected. Not because humans were merciful, but because they were decisive. An ancient strategist once remarked in a private archive, "Other species fight to win. Humans fight to make sure the same war never has to be fought again." That understanding came too late for some. A splinter faction of the ancient assembly, those who still believed humanity could be controlled, made one final attempt. They targeted Earth itself. Not with fleets, not with invasion, but with something subtler: engineered collapse, financial disruption, social destabilization, information warfare. It was elegant. It almost worked. What they failed to understand was that Earth had already survived itself. Human systems bent, cracked, and reorganized. Old structures fell. New ones rose. The chaos that would have shattered another civilization became fuel. Within a decade, Earth emerged stronger, more unified, more prepared. Seraphine watched the transformation with a mixture of pride and unease. She had loved a human, ruled beside one, but this was something else. Humanity was no longer reacting to the galaxy. It was anticipating it. When the splinter faction finally revealed itself, humanity didn't respond with outrage. They responded with documentation. Centuries of evidence. Recorded interference. Economic manipulation. Silent wars fought in shadows. The revelations detonated across galactic media. Allies withdrew. Neutral powers recoiled. The faction found itself isolated, politically, economically, culturally. They had planned for resistance. They had not planned for exposure. Within months, the faction dissolved. Not conquered. Not destroyed. Rendered irrelevant. Seraphine addressed the Galactic Council for what would be her final time as Empress. Her voice carried the weight of centuries, and the quiet influence of a species that had changed everything. The universe once believed power was domination, she said. Then it believed power was fear. Humanity has shown us something else. She paused, eyes lingering on the human delegates. Power is endurance. The council chamber, once dismissive, now listened. In the centuries that followed, humans spread, not as conquerors, not as rulers, but as anchors. They built worlds designed not for beauty, but for survival. They formed alliances not based on blood or species, but shared risk. And wherever humans went, the galaxy grew, steadier, not safer, steadier, because humans did not eliminate danger. They learned how to live with it. Long after Seraphine joined Daniel among the stars, long after ancient empires faded into history, a simple truth remained etched into every major archive, taught in academies and whispered in war rooms. Humans were never the strongest. They were never the oldest. They were never the most gifted. They were the ones who endured. The ones who learned. The ones who remembered. And when the universe tested them, as it always does, they did not ask why. They asked how long they had, and what they could build with it. That was why the galaxy no longer laughed. That was why it watched carefully when humans spoke softly. And that was why, when new civilizations looked up at the stars and asked to truly shape the fate of the universe, the answer was never given in fear, but in respect. Because the galaxy had underestimated humanity once, and it would never survive making that mistake again. Yet even respect can rot into resentment. As centuries passed, a new generation of civilizations rose. Young species who had not lived through the age of humiliation, who had not watched their elders retreat from shadows cast by humans. To them, the stories sounded exaggerated. Myths amplified by time. Legends built to keep them obedient. They looked at humans and saw softness again. Short lifespans. Emotional bonds. A tendency to negotiate instead of dominate. And once more, the universe prepared to test the same lesson. The first sparks appeared at the fringe of human space. Trade convoys harassed. Research stations sabotaged. Not enough to justify war, just enough to provoke a response. Humanity did not respond. That silence unsettled the aggressors far more than retaliation would have. Within human councils, debates were brief. There was no panic, no outrage. Only data. Probability. Memory. We've seen this before. one human admiral said quietly. They want to know where the line is. And another asked, we decide where it stays. The response, when it came, was invisible. Human networks disengaged from shared systems. Human infrastructure became self-contained, modular, redundant. Supply chains rerouted through paths no one had bothered to map. AI frameworks shifted into architectures too decentralized to disrupt. To the outside galaxy, it looked like humans were withdrawing again. They weren't. They were hardening. The young civilizations finally escalated, launching a coordinated strike on a border world, a human colony known more for agriculture than defense. They expected outrage. They expected surrender. They expected the same slow, ceremonial wars their teachers had fought. What they encountered instead was resistance without theater. No speeches. No declarations. No warnings. Human ships appeared exactly where they were least expected. Not to conquer, but to isolate. Jump points vanished behind collapsing spacetime distortions. Command nodes went dark. Entire fleets found themselves unable to communicate, navigate, or retreat. The battle lasted less than an hour. The aftermath lasted generations. Captured commanders were treated humanely. Federation healed. Returned. With records. Footage of every decision they had made. Every escalation. Every assumption. A message accompanied them back to their people. It was short. Human. You misunderstood our silence. It was not fear. The galaxy watched as those civilizations withdrew, not in shame, but in awe. Because for the first time, they understood something ancient empires had learned the hard way. Humans did not rush to violence because violence was expensive. They delayed because they were calculating cost, long-term cost. When humanity finally spoke on the matter, it was through a historian, not a general. Our species, the human said calmly, was forged on a world that tried to kill us every day. Predators. Climate. Ourselves. We survived not by being the strongest, but by learning when to act. He looked across the chamber. If we have gone quiet, he continued, it is because we are listening. And if we act, it is because we have already decided how this ends. No empire challenged them after that. Not because humans were unstoppable, but because they were patient. Time moved on. Stars were born. Others died. Civilizations rose and fell. Through it all, humans remained, sometimes prominent, sometimes quiet, never irrelevant. And in the deepest archives of the galaxy, alongside the oldest warnings and the most sacred laws, one final note remained unchanged since the age of Daniel Mercer. Do not mistake humanity's restraint for weakness. Do not mistake their empathy for hesitation. Because when humans finally decide to act, they do not ask if they will win. They ask what must survive afterward. And the universe, having learned at last, adjusted itself accordingly. That adjustment did not come easily. The universe had learned to avoid provoking humanity, but avoidance bred distance, and distance bred misunderstanding. As human influence stabilized vast regions of space, some civilizations began to feel overshadowed. Not conquered. Not oppressed. Simply outpaced. Human worlds thrived not because they were perfect, but because they were resilient. Where others optimized for efficiency, humans optimized for recovery. Where others built monuments, humans built redundancies. Where others planned for victory, humans planned for failure, and what came after it. This difference became impossible to ignore when the galaxy faced its first true existential threat in millennia. It arrived without warning. A region of space simply stopped behaving like space. Stars dimmed. Gravity distorted. Physics itself fractured into contradictions. Ships that entered the anomaly never returned. Not destroyed, but erased, as if they had never existed. The ancient species were the first to panic. Their models failed. Their prophecies contradicted each other. Psychic species screamed of absence, a void where even thought could not persist. The anomaly expanded. Worlds near its edge began to destabilize. Evacuations failed. Hyperlanes collapsed. The galaxy turned, slowly and reluctantly, toward humanity. Human scientists were the first to say the words no one else would. This isn't an enemy, they reported. It's a process. A natural one. Inevitable. The universe correcting itself. Ancient civilizations demanded solutions. weapons, barriers, sacrifices, something to stop it. Humanity offered none of those. Instead, they offered preparation. You can't fight this, a human physicist said during the emergency convocation. But you can survive it, if you stop trying to preserve what was, and start building for what comes next. Many rejected that idea immediately. Abandoning worlds was unthinkable. Letting stars die was heresy. Humans had no such illusions. They began evacuations early. Not chaotically, but systematically. Entire populations relocated through networks designed decades earlier for scenarios no one else believed in. Human ships ferried not just their own people, but anyone willing to leave. Some accepted. Many refused. The anomaly grew. When it finally reached the first major empire, the galaxy watched in horror as centuries of power vanished into silence. Fleets, cities, history itself, gone. And humanity mourned, but did not stop. They adapted their plans, adjusted timelines, rerouted survivors. Other species noticed something unsettling. Humans were grieving, yet functioning. They accept loss too easily, one ancient lamented. No, a human replied quietly. We just learned long ago that denial kills faster than grief. As the anomaly consumed more space, a pattern emerged, one only humans recognized. It wasn't random. It was following density, complexity, concentration. Civilizations that clung hardest to rigid structures fell first. Those that dispersed, simplified, and let go, survived longer. Humanity shared this openly. Some listened. Some didn't. When the anomaly finally reached the borders of human core worlds, panic rippled across the galaxy. Surely now they would break. Surely now the survivors would see humans run. Instead, humanity executed a plan older than their interstellar age. They scattered. Not fleeing, but seeding. Ships launched toward distant, barely charted stars. Archives duplicated endlessly. Culture compressed into adaptable forms. Children taught not just where they came from, but how to rebuild anywhere. Humanity did not try to save the galaxy. They tried to ensure that something endured. In the end, when the anomaly stabilized, having consumed a third of known space, the survivors gathered in what remained. And there, amid ruins and silence, a realization settled over them like gravity. Humanity had not predicted the anomaly. They had predicted that something like it would eventually exist. Because humans did not believe the universe was safe. They believed it was temporary. A young species once asked a human elder, standing beneath a sky with fewer stars than it remembered, "Why weren't you afraid?" The human considered the question. "Because fear assumes you deserve permanence," they said. "We never did." The galaxy rebuilt, smaller, humbler, wiser. And at the center of it, not ruling, not commanding, but quietly present, were humans. Not because they were chosen, but because they had always prepared for the day when nothing else would be. And somewhere, beyond what was left of map space, the universe continued, vast, indifferent, dangerous. Humanity looked into it, as it always had, and adapted. Humans adapted, survived, and watched the remnants of old empires struggle to understand a species that refused to fit any mold. Daniel Mercer's legacy had grown beyond legend. It had become protocol. Systems were restructured, fleets were decentralized, and entire colonies operated on principles no ancient civilization had considered logical: redundancy, autonomy, adaptability. But the galaxy, as it always does, never stops testing. New stars were colonized, new species awakened, and with them came ambition, envy, and the desire to test the humans again. Young civilizations, unaware of what had happened centuries before, began pushing boundaries, believing humans could still be intimidated, still be controlled, still be coerced. They were wrong. It began quietly at the outer colonies, where humans had seeded small, self-sufficient worlds. Trade routes were probed. Satellites tampered with. Communications intercepted. Humans didn't panic. They catalogued, mapped, and anticipated. Every incursion, no matter how subtle, was logged, analyzed, and counted. When a fleet of young raiders attempted to blockade a minor human colony, they expected an easy victory. They underestimated the simple elegance of human strategy. Civilian ships, barely armed, were routed through decoy hyperspace paths, only to converge simultaneously at multiple nodes, cutting off the raiders' supply lines and isolating them completely. No lives were lost. No war declared. And yet the raiders never returned home. Word spread quickly. The galaxy began murmuring again. Humans. Unpredictable. Dangerous. Patient. Every encounter reinforced a simple fact. Humans did not fight the way other species did. They were not the strongest, the fastest, or the most psychic. They did not overwhelm with firepower or manipulate minds with telepathy. They acted like humans, calculating, resilient, endlessly patient, and terrifyingly creative under pressure. Seraphine, now centuries into her reign thanks to Varelian longevity, observed the results with quiet awe. Daniel's teachings, his strategies, and his insistence that humans could survive anything had been internalized. Humanity no longer needed guidance. They had become a galactic force of their own kind, subtle, indirect, and nearly invisible until it was too late for their adversaries. The next challenge came not from war or politics but from nature itself. A cluster of stars, unstable and unpredictable, began collapsing at unprecedented rates. Radiation bursts threatened inhabited systems. Rogue planets drifted into populated sectors. Most species panicked, deploying fleets and sending fleets to counter what seemed unstoppable. Humans responded differently. They deployed observation teams, autonomous reconstruction drones, and adaptive shield arrays. They created systems that responded in real time, with AI protocols designed not for domination, but for resilience. Entire planets were evacuated and rebuilt before disasters could strike. Ancient empires watched helplessly as humans turned catastrophic collapse into manageable evolution. Once again, Daniel's legacy whispered through history. Survival is not about defeating the universe. Survival is about enduring it. Centuries of observation had trained human minds to anticipate chaos and act decisively. When the natural disasters stabilized, what remained were thriving systems, intact civilizations, and a species now seen not as fragile or irrelevant but as fundamentally unbreakable. The galaxy began to change its approach. Former rivals approached humans with caution, offering alliances and trade in ways they had never considered necessary. Even the younger civilizations, previously reckless and ambitious, began consulting human strategists before launching initiatives that could have escalated into conflict. Humans had not conquered the galaxy. They had reshaped it. Legends of Daniel Mercer became case studies, archived across species, taught in military academies, and repeated in whispers across the stars. Not because he was immortal or godlike, but because he exemplified what humans had always been capable of, adapting, surviving, and ultimately redefining the rules that every other civilization had taken for granted. Seraphine watched as young human leaders took the stage, quietly commanding attention not through power or spectacle, but through calm authority. Their presence reminded the galaxy that humans were not to be underestimated, that restraint could be as powerful as aggression, and that the long view was more lethal than any weapon. Then came the most profound test, a threat unlike any before. A dark anomaly, vast and incomprehensible, emerged from the void. It was not a fleet, not a war, not a political maneuver. It was raw cosmic force, a shifting mass of energy and reality itself, destabilizing entire sectors. For most species, it was a death sentence. Entire worlds vanished before understanding. Humans responded with the tools they had cultivated over centuries: observation, patience, adaptation. Fleets monitored, evacuated, and reconstructed. Scientists studied, predicted, and mitigated. Entire colonies were relocated using protocols that anticipated anomalies before they fully formed. The galaxy watched in awe and fear as humans faced what even the oldest empires could not comprehend, and survived. Through it all, humans remained themselves, compassionate, calculating, unyielding, and remarkably patient. The universe tested them, time and again, and each time humans endured, learned, and evolved. They did not dominate the galaxy. They did not conquer. They endured, and by enduring, they became the measure against which all other civilizations judged themselves. Seraphine, long-lived and wise, reflected on the course of history. Humanity's strength had never been in their weapons, their fleets, or their psionics. It was in their determination to survive, their ability to endure, and their capacity to act decisively when all else failed. Daniel Mercer had passed into history centuries before, but his presence lingered. Humans remembered. They survived not because they were invincible, but because they had never relied on invincibility. They relied on endurance, ingenuity, and adaptability. the qualities that ensured their species would persist when others fell. And so the galaxy entered a new era, quiet and cautious, aware that humans could never again be dismissed. They were no longer underestimated. They were inevitable. Humans were inevitable. That truth no one could deny anymore. By the time the galaxy fully grasped it, humanity had become a silent spine holding entire civilizations upright. The final test came not from war, politics, or cosmic anomalies, but from the universe itself. A region of space, previously stable, began collapsing in unpredictable ways. Stars dimmed, planets fractured, and energy waves rendered navigation impossible. Ancient empires scrambled fleets, sending psychic probes, technology, and emissaries to try to understand. None succeeded. None survived intact. Humans responded differently. Not with brute force, not with panic, not with despair. They watched. They calculated. They adapted. Entire colonies were moved. Fleets rerouted. Civilizations were instructed in methods of survival humans had honed over millennia. Evacuation protocols, autonomous construction systems, and contingency plans led into contingency plans. Every failure of another species became a lesson, stored, replicated, and improved upon. The galaxy began to see a pattern. Wherever humans acted, survival rates skyrocketed. Civilizations previously thought doomed were preserved. Systems thought lost were rebuilt. Even under the most chaotic and unpredictable conditions, humans found a way to endure. A young species asked one of the human elders during a council meeting, "Why do you survive when everything else falls apart?" The human replied simply, "We survive because we refuse to assume permanence. We accept change, and we build for it." The answer spread like wildfire. Military academies and diplomatic schools studied the human model. Scholars debated it endlessly. Philosophers tried to understand it. And yet, no one could replicate it. Because humanity did not survive through superiority. They survived through adaptability, foresight, patience, and stubbornness. Qualities no weapon could destroy, no fleet could contain, and no psionic power could break. Centuries after Daniel Mercer's death, his name was still whispered, not as a deity, not as a conqueror, but as the first example of what humans could do. He had shown the galaxy that one human, when underestimated, could outmaneuver fleets, outthink empires, and survive the impossible. His strategy had become the foundation upon which humanity built a species-wide doctrine: endure, adapt, and act decisively when necessary. Galactic historians later wrote, "Daniel Mercer taught us that the universe does not reward strength or intelligence alone. It rewards persistence. It rewards the species that remembers, that learns, that never surrenders, not because they are immortal, but because they refuse to disappear quietly." The galaxy had learned the hard way. Underestimate humans once, and you might survive. Underestimate them twice, and entire empires could vanish. By the end of the millennium, humans had become something almost mythic. Not rulers, not oppressors, not tyrants, but anchors. Everywhere they went, systems stabilized. Trade flourished. Science advanced. Knowledge preserved. Wars ended faster. Chaos was mitigated. The universe was not safe, but human presence made it survivable. Even Daniel's teachings, written centuries earlier, remained relevant. Strength is temporary. Life is temporary. But endurance is infinite when paired with intelligence and adaptability. Humanity does not survive by being the strongest. We survive because we refuse to be broken. When new civilizations arose, they learned to respect humans immediately. Not because humans demanded it, but because ignoring them had consequences. They learned that diplomacy, patience, and calculated action could be far more dangerous than fleets of warships. And so, in the quiet spaces between stars, humans thrived. Not because they sought dominion, but because they understood the rules of the universe better than anyone else. Seraphine, still alive beyond what many species thought possible, watched from her vantage point in orbit above her homeworld. The galaxy had changed. Chaos and war had not vanished, but patterns were different now. The rhythm of survival had shifted. Humanity's influence was everywhere, subtle and enduring, like a pulse running through the veins of the stars. She smiled as she reflected on the man who had started it all. Daniel Mercer. A human who had been underestimated, dismissed, and laughed at. A human who had survived every test the universe threw at him. A human whose quiet courage had shaped civilizations, rewritten strategies, and changed the fate of entire species. When she closed her eyes, she could see it clearly. The legacy of humans was not in war, nor in conquest. It was in endurance, in resilience, in the ability to survive the impossible and to teach others how to do the same. The galaxy had learned a lesson it would never forget. Humans were never harmless. Humans were never weak. Humans were inevitable. And as long as they endured, the stars themselves would remember. For humanity, the universe was not a playground or a kingdom. It was a challenge, and they had mastered it. And that mastery was eternal.